Can the Dolphins remain undefeated? Let's get it.
Welcome to FaZe Fantasy Live with your host, Lonnie Z.
Welcome to the show, everyone. It is crazy. Week 4 is already here, and we have Thursday night football. This is the Thursday night football edition of FaZe Fantasy Live, where we have the Dolphins and the Bengals. Cincinnati is favored by 3.5 points, so that's what Vegas thinks. Vegas does not believe that the Dolphins can stay undefeated. Well, let's get right into it. You know, this should be a real good game. You have a lot of firepower. You have the Bengals high-powered offense. You have the Dolphins high-powered offense. The Dolphins very opportunistic defense. And so it's all set up to be a great Thursday night matchup. Tua Tagovailoa has been dealing with an ankle and a back injury, and he's officially listed as questionable to play in tonight's game. Now, he didn't practice on Monday, but he had limited practices on Tuesday and Wednesday. He's expected to play tonight, so keep your eye on him, though, and on the injury report to make sure that he's actually active. If he's your number one quarterback, then you have to run him out there. But he hasn't been playing like a number one this year. He had one big game against the Ravens, and then his other two games have been kind of subpar. He did go up against that tough Bills defense last week, so that's kind of understandable, and he got a little banged up. So just watch the injury report to see if he's active if you have to play him. Tyreek Hill, on the other hand, is looking to bounce back because he had a really, really bad game Sunday. Despite posting a season-high 86% snap share, he finished last week's game with just 2 catches for 33 yards. That's crazy. The Bengals have only allowed 84.1 fantasy points to wide receivers this season. That's the 6th lowest in the NFL. So they're pretty tight and they're pretty tough on opposing wide receivers. Their defense is kind of ball hawking in the defensive backfield, and that's what you want if you're Cincinnati. But, you know, this is Tyreek Hill. If you have Tyreek Hill on your team, he's a must start every time he's out there. Because even if he had a horrible week last week, he's capable of getting 40 and winning your weekend for you. So run him out there, trust him. Tyreek Hill, I'd take him any day of the week. He's got to start. He's a must start. Jalen Waddle. Now, Jalen Waddle is dealing with a groin injury. Both him and Cedric Wilson are listed as questionable to play in tonight's game. So you got to look at the injury report, make sure that they are available, or at least that Jalen Waddle's available. Now, he did not practice on Monday, and he was limited in the last 2 days. On Tuesday, Wednesday practices, he had limited practices. Now, Waddle, he's having a great year. He has 19 receptions on 30 targets for 342 yards and 3 touchdowns. If he's healthy, he's a must start, because he can have a big game and he can win your weekend for you too. The Dolphins really have a couple of dynamic wide receivers. Their duo is as good as anyone's in the league. And as for that backfield, that Miami backfield, Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert, you just got to stay away from them. Just fade that whole backfield because it's been kind of crazy. Remember in the Ravens game, Mostert took over in the second half. And you didn't even see Edmonds much. And they got this crazy timeshare going on. That's just a backfield to stay away from. It just doesn't make any sense to even bother with it. Now, on the Cincinnati side, Joe Mixon, remember, he left the game early on Sunday with an ankle injury, but he put in full practices on Tuesday and Wednesday, and he's no longer listed on the final injury report. He should be ready for this one. For his usual role and workload. So he's good to go tonight against the Dolphins. If you have him, you know, I've been getting a lot of questions and people want to know, do I start Joe this week? Do I start Joe Mixon? Should I sit him? Well, I think you got to start Joe Mixon all the time. If you have him, you're going to start him. And I know that he's banged up a little bit, but he's not on the injury report anymore. If you have Joe Mixon, you have to start him. But it is kind of sketchy though if you look at it. Now this season he's had 58 attempts, 163 yards. He's only averaging 2.8 yards per carry. That's horrible with 0 touchdowns. He has 20 targets, 13 receptions, and 0 touchdowns. In those 3 games in PPR formats, he has 39.6 fantasy points. He's averaging 13.2 fantasy points per game. But it's not even that good though, because if you look how he got that average in game 1, he scored 21.5. That's more than 3/4 of his whole season's points right there. In game 2, he had 11.3, and in game 3, granted he left early, but he only had 6.8 fantasy points. So you got to be careful with Joe Mixon. But if you have him, you're going to start him. Jamar Chase is always a must start, no matter what. As long as he's healthy, he's a must start. Now, in the first game of the season, he had 10 catches for 129 yards and a touchdown. It looked like he was rolling and just getting ready to have a great year, and he probably will have a great year. But the last 2 games, he's really dipped. He's only had 11 receptions for 83 yards and a touchdown in the last 2 games. That's not good at all. Now, one good thing is that Miami has allowed 497 air yards. That's the 5th worst mark in the NFL. With Dolphins safety Brandon Jones, he's dealing with a chest injury. And cornerback Xavier Howard, he's got a groin and a glute problem. And, they may not even play. So Chase could be in line for a good game tonight against the Dolphins. And he likes to show out in prime time. So get Jamar Chase out there, and hopefully he'll have a good game for you. And that brings us to Joe Burrow. Now, Joe Burrow, he hasn't had a great season either, but he finally got his team in the win column last week against the Jets. He had 275 yards passing for 3 TDs and 23 fantasy points, which is a much better game than he had been having. Now, the Dolphins defense has given up some hideous fantasy numbers to opposing quarterbacks this season. Miami also does not get to the quarterback. They only have 6 sacks all year. So this is a perfect matchup for Joe Burrow to get right and for the Cincinnati Bengals to get right. It should be a very, very entertaining game. I have the Bengals to keep it rolling and to get to 500. And I'll take the 3.5. The Dolphins, they'll take their first L tonight. But you know what? They are off to a great start. And you never know. With that Dolphins defense, that's the type of defense that you could stream against good teams because they always seem to come up with big plays against good offenses. So it should be a very entertaining game. Hopefully Tua will be healthy and everyone will be at their full strength. Because when these 2 teams are at their full strength, you can have a shootout, an offensive. So there are some big, big names on both sides of the ball in this one. So don't miss it. And remember, this weekend, there's an early game in London. So get your lineups set. Don't forget to get your lineup set. We're going to be back out here on Friday night. We'll probably post the podcast on Saturday morning to get you ready for your Sunday games and get you all caught up on the injury report, start, sit, and we're going to do our daily fantasy with FanDuel. So be looking out for that. But don't miss tonight's game. It should be a great game. Miami, Cincinnati, Thursday night football. Doesn't get much better than that. We'll catch you on the next one.